John, a former Navy SEAL, lay still in the hospital bed, his body a silent testament to an illness that baffled 17 doctors. The sterile room felt cold, the air thick with the hum of machines and the unspoken worry of the medical staff. His chest barely rose and fell, a shallow breath for a man who once navigated the deepest oceans and fiercest battlefields. Sarah, his wife, stood beside him. Her face was a picture of sorrow, her eyes fixed on John. But for a fleeting second, a strange, almost imperceptible flicker crossed her features. It wasn't grief. Not entirely. There was a coldness there, a calculated disdain that she quickly masked as her gaze drifted towards the cluster of doctors and nurses murmuring quietly by the door. A young intern, fresh from medical school and still full of a desperate hope to help, stepped forward. He cleared his throat, his voice uncertain but firm. "Dr. Miller, I've been reviewing John's charts again. There's a new diagnostic test. It's unconventional, but it might give us a lead on some rare neurological conditions that could explain his symptoms." He looked from John to Sarah, then back to his senior colleague, searching for approval. Sarah's head turned slowly, her expression hardening just slightly. Her voice was calm, almost unnervingly so, but it carried a subtle sneer that sliced through the intern's suggestion. 17 doctors have failed to find anything, she stated, her words dropping like ice chips into the quiet room. It's time to accept the inevitable. She didn't raise her voice, but the finality in her tone left no room for argument. It was a dismissal, not just of the intern's idea, but of any further effort to save John. The way she said inevitable made it sound like a welcome outcome. Her composure was unsettling. Most wives would be clinging to any shred of hope, but Sarah seemed ready. It made you wonder what she was really thinking. As Sarah turned to leave the room, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through John's left hand. It was quick, a brief spasm of movement that barely registered. At the exact same moment, the medical equipment beside his bed briefly sputtered. A single, anomalous reading, a spike on a monitor that had been flatlining for hours, flashed across the screen in bright red. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it stabilized, returning to its previous, monotonous pattern. The intern, still standing there, blinked, wondering if he had imagined it. Even in the shadow of betrayal, truth finds a way to whisper. Sarah didn't notice. Her back was to the bed as she walked towards the door, her steps measured and even. She pushed the door open and stepped out into the bustling hospital corridor, leaving John's fate hanging in the balance, utterly unaware of the brief, almost supernatural anomaly that had just occurred. The tremor, the spike on the monitor. What did they mean? And what were Sarah's true intentions, hidden behind that carefully constructed facade of grief? Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. John grew up in a small patriotic town deep in rural Texas. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, and Sunday mornings meant church, followed by community barbecues, where the smoke from the grills hung heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of freshly cut grass. Military service wasn't just a tradition, it was a way of life, a badge of honor passed down through generations. John had answered that call with pride, serving his country as a Navy SEAL, a decision that etched itself into every fiber of his being. After his tours, he came back to the familiar landscape of his family ranch, a sprawling piece of land that had seen generations of his family work its soil. His days fell into a comfortable rhythm. He'd wake with the sun, tend to his cattle, fix fences, and spend hours maintaining the old farmhouse. His hands, once trained for combat, now found peace in the honest work of the land. The town respected him, not just for his service, but for the quiet strength he carried, the way he'd always lend a hand without being asked, and the calm wisdom in his eyes. He was John, the veteran, the rancher, the steady presence everyone could count on. Despite the outward calm, John carried invisible scars from his time in service. There were nights when the ranch's silence felt too loud, when memories he tried to bury would resurface, sharp and unwelcome. He rarely spoke about it, not wanting to burden anyone, but his lingering PTSD was a quiet companion that shaped his world. Yet, he also held onto a dream, a vision that brought him comfort and purpose. To transform a part of his ranch into a sanctuary for fellow veterans, a place where they could find peace, heal, and rebuild their lives, just as he was trying to do. He imagined cabins, a shared workshop, open fields for therapy, a community built on understanding and shared experience. It was a humble dream, but it was deeply rooted in his compassion and his own journey. This is where Sarah entered his life. She was beautiful, vibrant, and seemed to understand him in a way no one else had. At first, she embraced his vision, talking about how wonderful it would be to help other veterans. She'd listen to his plans, nod encouragingly, and even offered suggestions for the ranch. John fell for her completely, believing he had found a partner who shared his values and his quiet life. But as time went on, a subtle shift began. Sarah, who initially admired his humble aspirations, started to hint at a desire for more. Her eyes would linger on magazines featuring sleek city apartments or exotic travel destinations. She'd talk about the potential of the ranch. But her ideas weren't about healing veterans. They were about turning it into a luxury retreat, a profitable venture that could fund a more glamorous lifestyle. She'd say things like, "John, imagine if we sold some of this land. We could finally live a little." Her ambition, once a charming spark, began to glow with a different kind of heat, one that threatened to scorch John's quiet dreams. She still played the part of the devoted wife, but underneath, a different kind of desire was taking root. A desire for a life far removed from the dusty fields and simple values of rural Texas. The stage was slowly being set for a conflict John never saw coming, a clash between his deep-seated purpose and Sarah's growing hunger for affluence. The cracks in John and Sarah's relationship didn't appear overnight. They formed slowly, like tiny fissures in dry earth, accumulating over time, each one a testament to a broken promise or a veiled insult. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, with Sarah's comments about the ranch. John would talk about needing a new fence for the cattle, and she would sigh, suggesting they should invest in something with real returns, not just more farm expenses. He'd try to explain the importance of maintaining the land, the legacy it represented, but her eyes would glaze over, clearly uninterested. It felt like she was chipping away at his decisions, making them seem small or foolish. Then came the financial complaints. John worked hard, diligently managing the ranch, but the profits were modest, enough for a comfortable, simple life. Sarah, however, always wanted more. She'd lament their financial situation even after a good harvest, making him feel like his selfless efforts weren't enough. "If only we had a little more, John," she'd say, looking pointedly around their cozy but unflashy home. It was a constant undertone, a subtle pressure that made him question his own worth, even though he was providing for them, and then some. He often felt unheard, his sacrifices minimized in favor of her desires for a different kind of life. The veiled humiliations began to sting more deeply. They'd be at a community barbecue, surrounded by friends and neighbors who respected John. If he spoke about his dream of the veterans' sanctuary, Sarah would interject with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, John's just got these simple dreams," she'd say, a small, patronizing smile playing on her lips. "He doesn't really think about the practical side of things." It felt like a punch to the gut each time, eroding his confidence, making his heartfelt aspirations seem childish. It was a subtle way of making him look less capable, less ambitious in front of others. She also started to manipulate him away from his veteran support groups. John found solace and understanding in these meetings, a place where he could talk about his experiences with others who truly understood. Sarah, however, saw them as a weakness. "You don't need to dwell on the past, John," she'd insist, her voice laced with a concern that felt more like control. "It just makes you sad. You should focus on us, on our future." She'd make plans for them on meeting nights, or subtly hint that he was too tired to go, slowly isolating him from a crucial support system. She framed it as caring, but it felt like she was cutting off his lifelines, making him more dependent on her. There were so many moments where John felt unseen, unappreciated. His quiet nature, once admired, became a target for her subtle barbs. If he was quiet at dinner, she'd ask loudly, "What's wrong, John? Cat got your tongue?" drawing everyone's attention to his perceived moodiness. His lingering PTSD, which he fought so hard to manage, was often dismissed as him being too sensitive or overreacting. These events, common in many households, were amplified by the emotional distance growing between them. His well-being was overlooked, his feelings brushed aside, always in favor of Sarah's agenda. He remembered one particular argument. He had spent weeks repairing a section of the barn, a tough, physical job that left him exhausted but proud. He came inside, hoping for a word of appreciation, but Sarah was on the phone, talking loudly about a new car she wanted. When he tried to show her the finished work, she barely glanced up. "Looks fine, John," she'd said, her voice flat. "Can we talk about something important now?" It was a small moment, but it solidified a deep sense of injustice, of his efforts being constantly devalued. He started to feel a profound weariness, not just physical, but emotional. It was as if he was constantly fighting an unseen battle, trying to keep his dreams alive, while Sarah steadily tried to dismantle them. The ranch, his sanctuary, began to feel less like home and more like a battleground. He felt trapped, his spirit slowly dimming under the weight of her constant disapproval and manipulation. He loved her, or at least he thought he did, but the person she had become was slowly suffocating him. He often thought back to the day he fell for her, and wondered how they had strayed so far. The medical crisis in the hospital, the unknown ailment that racked his body, wasn't just a sudden event. It was the crushing culmination of these years of emotional neglect, the subtle abuse, the constant undermining. It was the physical manifestation of a spirit pushed to its absolute breaking point, a body finally giving up under a burden it could no longer carry. The emotional atmosphere in John's home grew heavier and heavier, like a thick blanket that slowly smothered everything. Small disagreements, which used to be easily smoothed over, now quickly turned into tense standoffs. Sarah's impatience was a constant, sharp edge, and John's quietness, once a source of comfort, now felt like a retreat, a sign of his growing distance. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. Arguments over money became almost daily. Sarah would bring up bills, the cost of ranch upkeep, and then compare it to the comfortable lives their friends led. It wasn't just about the numbers, it was about how John was supposedly failing to provide. His health also became a point of contention. When he felt tired, she'd accuse him of being lazy. If he coughed, she'd sigh dramatically, implying he was being a burden. Her absences from home grew more frequent, and when she was there, she was often on the phone, her voice hushed, or she was out with friends John barely knew. The pressure from her to sell the ranch, his family's land, and move to a more sophisticated city intensified. She'd talk about it as if it were a done deal, painting pictures of a life he didn't want, a life far away from the open spaces and the quiet dignity of his current existence. John also started to feel the weight of judgment from some of Sarah's more affluent friends. They would visit, usually at Sarah's insistence, and their casual remarks would sting. "Oh, John, still roughing it out here?" one might say, or "Isn't it time you considered something less rustic?" These comments, delivered with a polite smile, were like tiny cuts, designed to make him feel inadequate. They subtly criticized his lifestyle, his hands-on work, and his lack of ambition to climb some corporate ladder. This external pressure only added to his isolation, making him feel like an outsider even in his own home. He often found himself retreating to the barn, finding solace in the familiar scent of hay and horses, anything to escape the subtle disdain he felt from Sarah's circle. Sarah's behavior became noticeably worse. Her criticism became more direct, her dismissiveness more open. She started to openly mock what she called John's weaknesses. If he struggled with a heavy feed sack, she'd make a comment about his failing strength. His deteriorating health, which he tried to hide, became another weapon for her. "Look at you, John," she'd say, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're just not the man you used to be, are you?" It was an unbearable emotional environment, a constant barrage of negativity that chipped away at his spirit. He felt like he was constantly under a microscope, every flaw magnified, every effort unappreciated. The narrative of John's internal struggle was one of a man slowly drowning. He felt trapped, his world shrinking around him. Sarah's relentless demands and the suffocating negative energy she brought into their home were crushing him. He tried to reason, to talk, but his words seemed to vanish into a void. His physical and mental decline was a direct result of this emotional suffocation. He was a strong man, a Navy SEAL, but even the strongest spirit can be broken by constant psychological warfare. He felt his energy draining, his thoughts becoming muddled. He knew he was losing himself, piece by agonizing piece. This was the silent, invisible battle he fought every day, a battle that nobody else saw, but one that was slowly leading him to his breaking point. The air in the hospital room was thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken dread. John lay still, a network of tubes and wires connecting him to blinking machines. The doctors had left, their faces etched with professional defeat, their pronouncements of "nothing more we can do" still echoing in Sarah's ears. She had just finished a hushed phone call, her voice low and careful, when the door creaked open. A small figure, barely reaching her waist, peered in. It was Lily, John's young neighbor, a girl with bright, curious eyes and a heart full of kindness. Lily held a small, colorful charm, a clumsy but heartfelt get-well-soon gift she had made herself. She was an aspiring vet tech, always observing, always learning, even from the smallest creatures on her family's farm. She tiptoed into the room, her gaze immediately drawn to John. As she placed the charm gently on his bedside table, her eyes drifted to his hand, resting limply on the white sheet. A tiny, almost imperceptible twitch ran through his fingers, a subtle neurological hiccup that the highly trained doctors, focused on complex data readouts and advanced diagnostics, had completely missed. It was a detail so small, so fleeting, that only someone used to watching for the subtlest signs in animals, or someone simply observing with an open mind, would ever notice. Lily frowned slightly, her young mind filing away the observation. She didn't know what it meant, but it felt important. Just then, the door opened again, and a man in a sharp suit entered. Sarah, startled, quickly ended her phone call and turned to greet him. Thinking Lily was too young to understand, Sarah and the man, who introduced himself as Mr. Davies, a lawyer, began to speak in hushed tones. Lily, too polite to interrupt, pretended to be fascinated by a pattern on the hospital curtain, but her ears were wide open. "The life insurance policies are all in order, Sarah," Mr. Davies said, his voice low but clear in the quiet room. "And with John's current condition, well, it simplifies things considerably." Sarah nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "And the ranch? Is there any way to expedite the sale?" Mr. Davies consulted a document. "We can certainly push it. With John incapacitated, you have sole authority as his spouse. The paperwork we discussed earlier, the power of attorney that covers all eventualities." Lily's stomach tightened. She didn't fully understand the legal jargon, but the words life insurance, sale, and incapacitated strung together with Sarah's cold demeanor sent a shiver down her spine. It sounded wrong. It sounded like Sarah wasn't hoping for John to get better. It sounded like she was planning for something else entirely. The innocent act of bringing a charm had turned into a devastating revelation. Lily, with her simple observation of John's twitching hand and her accidental eavesdropping, unknowingly held the key to John's survival and Sarah's exposure. This moment marked a critical turning point. For months, John had suffered in silence, his emotional and physical decline hidden behind Sarah's facade of concern. Now, in the sterile quiet of the hospital, an innocent child's presence and her unclouded observations had disrupted Sarah's carefully constructed plan. Lily's unexpected kindness had created an unforeseen opportunity, a crack in the wall of deceit that Sarah had built. The cycle of John's passive suffering was about to be broken, not by doctors or lawyers, but by a young girl who simply noticed things others didn't. Her innocent act was about to set in motion a chain of events that would expose the truth and potentially save John's life. Lily, clutching the handmade charm tighter, stumbled out of John's hospital room, her heart pounding. The words she'd overheard echoed in her mind, a jumble of scary adult talk that she instinctively knew was bad. She didn't understand all the big words, but she understood the coldness in Sarah's voice, the way she talked about John as if he were just a thing to be sold off. The twitch in John's hand now seemed like a desperate signal, not just a random movement. She hurried down the long, sterile hallway, her small legs carrying her as fast as they could, until she found the waiting room where her grandmother sat, patiently knitting. "Grandma," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible, pulling on her grandmother's sleeve. "Something's wrong with Mrs. Sarah and Mr. John." Her grandmother, a woman whose eyes held the wisdom of many years and whose hands were never idle, immediately sensed the distress in Lily's voice. She put down her knitting, her gaze steady and kind. "What is it, Sweet Pea? What did you see?" Lily, still shaken, recounted everything. The subtle twitch in John's hand that the doctors had missed, the hushed conversation between Sarah and the lawyer, the words life insurance, ranch, and expedite the sale. She described Sarah's small, cold smile, a detail that chilled her more than anything else. Her grandmother listened, her expression unreadable at first, then slowly hardening into a look of deep concern. She knew Sarah, knew her ambition, but this sounded far more sinister than simple greed. Meanwhile, back in John's room, things were beginning to shift, albeit subtly. Lily's observation, though relayed indirectly through a nurse who had overheard Lily's worried chatter, had sparked a tiny flicker of curiosity among the medical staff. A junior resident, remembering a lecture on rare neurological conditions, decided to run a specific, less common test. John remained unconscious, his breathing shallow, his life still hanging by the thinnest of threads. The weight of his condition pressed heavily on the hospital, a puzzle that 17 doctors had failed to solve. Lily's grandmother, a respected elder in their small Texas town, didn't waste time. She knew how things worked in their community, the power of quiet conversations and shared concerns. She started by subtly asking around, mentioning Sarah's sudden interest in selling the ranch, her seemingly detached demeanor at the hospital. She spoke with Mrs. Henderson from the church, with Mr. Peterson down at the hardware store, and with Old Manley, who ran the general store. These were people who had known John and Sarah for years, who had seen their relationship evolve, or rather, deteriorate. Initially, some neighbors were still sympathetic to Sarah, viewing her as the distraught wife of a dying man. But as Lily's grandmother carefully planted seeds of doubt, weaving together observations of Sarah's past behavior with Lily's recent revelations, a different picture began to form. People started recalling Sarah's complaints about John's simple life, her constant desire for more money, her quickness to dismiss his dreams for the veterans' sanctuary. Hushed rumors began to circulate, not as malicious gossip, but as genuine concern for John. The strong community ties and informal network of communication in their small town proved to be incredibly effective. Shared observations, once dismissed as minor, now seemed to fit into a disturbing pattern. The psychological impact of these whispers was profound. Lily herself grappled with the weight of her discovery. She felt a mix of fear, guilt, and a strange sense of responsibility. She, a young girl, had stumbled upon something that grown-ups, smart doctors even, had missed. The doctors, now under increasing pressure to find a diagnosis for John, felt their reputations on the line. The subtle shift in their approach, spurred by a child's innocent observation, marked the beginning of a desperate scramble for answers, a race against time to save a man who had served his country, now betrayed by the one he trusted most. The community, once united in grief, was now divided by suspicion, and the truth, slowly but surely, was beginning to surface. The junior resident, spurred by Lily's observation and a newfound determination, finally hit on the correct diagnosis. It was a rare, autoimmune neurological condition, one that mimicked many other common ailments, explaining why it had evaded so many experienced doctors. The good news was that it was treatable. John's recovery was slow, a grueling process of physical therapy and medication, but he was alive. Each small improvement, each regained movement, was a victory celebrated by the nurses, by Lily, and by the now relieved medical team. Lily's grandmother, with her quiet but effective groundwork, had gathered enough information to turn suspicion into concrete evidence. The community, once whispering, now spoke openly about Sarah's strange behavior, her sudden interest in selling the ranch, and the way she had always seemed to resent John's dreams. When Sarah, feeling the walls close in, tried to hastily liquidate more of John's assets and sell the ranch, it was the final straw. The lawyer she had been consulting, a man with a conscience, had become increasingly uncomfortable with her demands and the speed at which she wanted things done. He discreetly contacted the authorities, After Lily's grandmother presented her findings, the evidence mounted quickly. Sarah's frantic phone calls about life insurance policies, her suspicious online searches for rare illnesses and their symptoms, and the sudden, large debts she had secretly accrued. When confronted, Sarah's carefully constructed facade crumbled. She was arrested, facing charges of financial fraud and attempted murder. Her reputation, once that of a grieving wife, was utterly destroyed. The small town, which had rallied around John, now saw Sarah for who she truly was. The justice system, slow but sure, began its work. John, still weak but with a clear mind, slowly pieced together what had happened. The betrayal cut deep, deeper than any physical wound. But instead of bitterness, a quiet resolve settled within him. He saw the faces of his community, the unwavering support, the kindness of Lily, who visited him every day, telling him stories about her dreams of becoming a vet tech. He realized he was not alone. Once fully recovered, John dedicated himself to fulfilling his long-held dream, creating a sanctuary for fellow veterans. He renamed his ranch the Sentinel, a place of peace and healing for those who had sacrificed so much. The community rallied around him, providing labor, donations, and expertise. Mrs. Henderson brought homemade meals, Mr. Peterson supplied building materials at cost, and Old Manley organized fundraisers. Lily, true to her word, became his first volunteer, her bright eyes and unwavering optimism a constant source of inspiration. She helped with the animals, learned about ranch life, and most importantly, became a cherished friend and confidant to John. The sanctuary bloomed, a testament to resilience, community, and the power of a single, observant child. John, once a victim, was now a beacon of hope, his life a living example that even in the darkest of times, compassion and truth can indeed prevail. He found peace, not in forgetting the past, but in building a future where no veteran would feel alone or betrayed. His purpose, clearer than ever, was to ensure that others found the same unwavering support that had saved him. The most profound insights, he often reflected, don't always come from experts or grand plans, but sometimes from the most unexpected places, like the sharp eyes of a curious young girl